Imagine soft rain tapping against a window, steady, gentle, comforting. The kind of sound that makes the world feel slow and safe. Tonight, we're drifting to a quiet coastal town, the kind of place where the ocean is both a lifeline and a mystery all its own. The harbor there is peaceful now. Boats rocking slowly. Nets hanging to dry. A few dim lights glowing from the pier. It's the sort of place where everyone knows everyone. And stories travel on the breeze just as easily as the smell of saltwater. But there's one story this town still whispers about. A story carried on the waves for years, and never quite settled. It began with a simple fishing trip. Two men heading out before sunrise, the sky still dark, the ocean calm enough to look like polished glass. They'd gone together many times before. It should have been like any other morning. Coffee in travel mugs, jackets zipped up against the dawn chill, and the soft rumble of the boat engine pushing them gently out toward open sea. But by the end of that day, only one of them came back. The other seemed to vanish into the water, no struggle heard, no distress called, no trace that the ocean was angry or wild. Just a quiet disappearance on an unusually calm morning. For years, people called it an accident. A tragic slip. A misstep on a wet deck. One of those heartbreaking things that sometimes happen at sea. But time has a way of uncovering things. Eyewitnesses remember details that didn't fit. The weather reports told a different story than the one written in the police notes. And someone in town confessed they'd heard the two men arguing days before the trip, though they kept that story to themselves for a long time. And that simple little fishing boat, the one that drifted back to shore with just one man on board, carried marks and scratches that didn't match the calmness of the ocean that morning. So the town began asking the question in quieter voices. Was this really an accident at sea? Or a perfect crime hidden by the waves? Tonight, as the rain continues to fall softly, we're going to walk through those moments, slowly, gently, like examining footprints before they wash away. No rush. No intensity. Just calm storytelling, piece by piece, as if you and I were sitting together on a quiet night, untangling a mystery that has slept beneath the tides for years. Take a slow breath. Let the rain guide your focus. And when you're ready, we'll begin the story of the fishing trip murder, lost at sea or perfect crime. Before we understand the mystery, we need to understand the men at the heart of it. Not just their final day together, but the lives that shaped them long before the fishing trip that changed everything. So imagine the rain still falling softly, and us settling deeper into the story. Danny was the kind of man people described with a small smile, not because he was perfect, but because he was familiar. Comfortable. Predictable in the best ways. He had lived in the same coastal town his whole life. Never wanted to move. Never tried to chase anything outside the rhythm of the tide. In town, everyone knew him for three things. 1. His steady, almost quiet kindness. He wasn't loud, but he remembered people's birthdays, and the way they took their coffee. 2. His loyalty to the sea. He had been fishing with his father since he was 9. By adulthood, he could predict the weather better than the local forecasts. 3. His routine. Danny woke at 4:45 every morning. Made the same breakfast. Said the same morning to the same bakery owner. Then walked to the docks with the same calm pace. People trusted him because he didn't have waves in his personality, just a steady tide. But beneath that gentle exterior, Danny had worries he kept to himself. Bills that had been piling up. A small family boat that needed more repairs than he could afford. And a friendship, one he valued deeply, that had recently become strained in subtle, uncomfortable ways. Joel was almost the opposite of Danny in every possible way. Where Danny was calm, Joel was restless. Where Danny kept to routines, Joel resisted anything predictable. Where Danny lived quietly, Joel wanted to be seen. He had arrived in the coastal town about 10 years earlier, not born there, not shaped by its slow rhythm. Some people said he came for work. Others said he came to escape something. Joel never confirmed either version. He was charming when he wanted to be. Funny in loud, spontaneous bursts. The type of man who made fast friends at bars and just as quickly fell out with them. But there was one relationship he seemed genuinely invested in. His friendship with Danny. To outsiders, the connection didn't quite make sense. Danny was steady. Joel was chaotic. Danny listened more than he spoke. Joel spoke more than he listened. Still, the two men formed a strange kind of balance, the calm sea and the unpredictable storm. They fished together, helped each other with repairs, and filled in the silence in each other's lives. But over the last year, cracks began to show. The townspeople didn't know the full story, but they noticed the signs. The two men arguing near the docks, voices low but sharp. Joel borrowing money and not paying it back. Danny becoming more withdrawn. A rumor, unconfirmed, that Joel had been involved in a bad business deal that Danny somehow got tangled in. And a final conversation overheard at the marina only days before the fishing trip. Where Joel said something that made Danny fall completely silent. No one knew what it was. But the look on Danny's face afterward. People still remember that. Two men, one boat. What made the situation even more tense was this. Danny didn't want to fish with Joel anymore. He had told at least two people he wanted a break from the partnership. But Joel insisted on one last trip. A chance, he said, to clear the air, to reset things, to get back to how it used to be. Danny agreed. Because that's who he was, gentle, trusting, hopeful. And that choice led them onto the water before sunrise. Toward a mystery that would haunt the town for years. If you listen closely, the rain in the background almost becomes the ocean itself. Soft waves brushing the side of a boat. That's how we ease into the day that changed everything. This wasn't a dramatic morning. There was no storm, no warning, nothing that hinted a life would be lost. It was the kind of quiet, ordinary dawn that fishermen knew well. A calm start, too calm. Danny arrived at the marina first. That was normal. He liked quiet moments before the world fully woke up, moments where he could tie up loose ropes or check the cooler without anyone talking. But this time, people noticed something different. Danny wasn't moving with his usual rhythm. His shoulders were stiff. He kept rubbing the back of his neck, like someone bracing for a conversation they didn't want to have. He stood at the edge of the dock, staring at the water. Not admiring it, but studying it. Almost as if he was thinking about turning around and going home. Joel arrives late. Joel arrived almost 20 minutes after they were supposed to leave. He was upbeat, overly upbeat. Talking louder than the morning required, joking in a way that felt slightly forced. He clapped Danny on the back, and witnesses said Danny didn't respond the way he usually did. He didn't smile. Didn't joke back. Didn't even look at Joel for a moment. The two of them walked toward the boat, the Renee Marie, a small, dependable fishing craft Danny had used for years. From a distance, they looked like two men headed out to sea the way they always had. But up close, you could feel something heavy between them. Not anger. Not open conflict. More like unresolved tension. The kind that sits in silence. Final preparations. Danny did his checks quietly. Fuel. Nets. Weather radio. Life jackets. 2 thermoses of coffee he had prepared earlier. Joel did fewer checks. He paced. He scrolled on his phone. He complained about how early it was. Danny didn't say much. But one thing bothered people who later remembered the scene. Before stepping into the boat, Danny hesitated. Just a half second. Just enough to look back toward the parking lot. Like he was waiting for someone to call his name. Or give him a reason not to go. But no one did. So he stepped in. And that small moment, barely noticeable, became something everyone talked about later. The water that morning was unusually still. A sheet of glass stretching toward the horizon. Clouds low and pale, but not storm-heavy. Perfect fishing weather, according to the locals. And that's what makes the rest of the story harder to understand. There were no strong winds. No sudden storm warnings. No mechanical issues noted on the boat's maintenance log. Everything about the day should have made for a safe trip. But the ocean has a strange way of holding secrets. And releasing them only when it wants to. At approximately 5:52 a.m., the René Marie untied from the dock. Danny at the wheel. Joel handling the lines, though clumsily, almost distracted. One fisherman on a nearby boat later said the two didn't speak to each other at all as they pulled away. Not even a simple, ready. Or, let's go. Just silence. The kind of silence that fills the air with a warning humans can sense even when they can't explain it. They headed out toward deeper waters, past the breakwater, where the marina lights faded into the early morning fog. That's the last time anyone saw both men alive together. If the earlier parts of this story felt like quiet waves and routine morning air, this part feels different. Not louder, but heavier. Like when the rain outside softens, yet you sense something shifting. Because this is where the day stops being ordinary. This is where the mystery begins. About 3 hours after the René Marie left the harbor, the local Coast Guard station logged a short, unclear radio transmission. Not a full distress call. Just fragments. Witnesses who listened later described it like this. A man's voice. Breathless. Not panicked, but strained. Words cutting in and out through static. A sentence that sounded like, "We need help, something's wrong." Some believed it was Danny. Some believed it was Joel. No one could confirm it. The call lasted 7 seconds. 7 seconds that would become the backbone of the entire investigation. And then, silence. No follow-up. No coordinates. No explanation. Just the ocean, steady and indifferent. Attempts to respond. The Coast Guard radioed back immediately. No answer. They tried again. Still nothing. They checked weather radar. No storms. They checked vessel trackers, no signals from the René Marie. They checked with nearby fishermen, nobody had seen the boat since dawn. The call was concerning, but without coordinates, they couldn't launch a full search yet. Sometimes radios crackle accidentally. Sometimes boaters hit the wrong channel. So they waited. Listened. Monitored. And the minutes passed quietly. 10:03 a.m., a second signal. Kind of. Almost an hour later, a brief ping showed up on the marine radar. A location, but only for a moment, out near the deeper channels where fishing boats rarely drift that early in the day. It wasn't a distress signal. Just a quick electronic blink, like the boat had flickered into view and then disappeared again. That small flicker was enough to justify a search. But it raised its own questions. Why was the boat so far from the agreed fishing area? Why was it drifting instead of anchored? And why would anyone turn off, or lose, all communication? The Coast Guard heads out. By late morning, 2 rescue vessels were navigating the waters where the signal had appeared. The sky was still calm. Waves were still manageable. Nothing screamed disaster. And yet the search teams described the scene as off, even though they couldn't explain why. It was as if the ocean was holding its breath. 11:48 a.m., the boat is found. The René Marie was eventually spotted about 4 nautical miles from the last radar ping, drifting slowly with the current. The boat was floating normally. Not capsized. Not damaged in any obvious way. Just empty. No men on board. No signs of a struggle. No overturned equipment. No radio issues that could easily explain the earlier call. The only unusual detail. One life jacket was missing. But only one. And that single detail sparked two theories. 1. An accident. One man fell overboard, the other jumped in to save him. 2. A staged scenario. One man left the boat intentionally, and the other followed. Or was forced. Both seemed possible. Both had problems. What the investigators noticed. Despite the boat looking almost untouched, investigators picked up on a few subtle things. A cup of coffee still warm inside the cabin. A fishing rod partially assembled, not yet used. A tackle box open, but nothing missing. And Danny's jacket neatly folded on the bench. Which people found strange, because he never fished without his jacket on the water. These weren't dramatic clues. Nothing screamed foul play. Nothing screamed accident either. They were just small puzzles. Little inconsistencies that didn't fit the kind of emergency suggested by the distress call. A search begins that same afternoon. By noon, the official search expanded. Helicopters. Patrol boats. Local fishermen volunteering. Drone sweeps of the water's surface. But the ocean gave nothing back. No debris. No floating gear. No sign of the missing life jacket. Nothing. It was as if Danny and Joel had vanished into the quiet space between waves. And that was the moment the town shifted, from confusion, to fear, to suspicion. Because two men don't just disappear on a calm day. Not without reason. Not without a story hidden beneath the water. The rain in the background feels fitting here, steady, soft, and a little heavy. Because the first 2 days after the disappearance weren't loud or chaotic. They were quiet in a way that made people uneasy. This is the part of the story where time feels slow. Where hours blur together. Where the ocean becomes both a hope and a fear. Day 1, afternoon to nightfall. After the empty boat was found, the search became urgent. But it never became frantic. The water was calm. The sky was clear enough that aerial crews didn't worry about visibility. Everything suggested the men should be easy to find. And that's what made it so unnerving when the search yielded nothing. 5 p.m. No sign of either man. Search teams expected to find at least something. A floating boot. A cooler. A hat. Part of a fishing line. A life jacket. But there was nothing. Just smooth water and the slow drifting of the Rene Marie. It was as if the ocean itself refused to give up clues. 7:10 p.m., search expanded. The Coast Guard widened the radius. The local fishermen joined in, some who knew Danny well, some who barely knew him but understood how the sea worked. They moved through the water in organized lines, sweeping back and forth. They called out the men's names even though they knew it wouldn't help. When the sun dipped below the horizon, the tone changed. Not panicked, but waited. This was no longer, they'll show up soon. This was, something is very wrong. Day 1, rumors begin. As soon as the sun set, the town started talking. Small towns always do. And because facts were limited, theories filled the silence. Rumor 1. A weather shift no one predicted. A few people insisted a small, sudden swell might have knocked one man overboard. But experienced fishermen said that didn't make sense. Not in waters that calm. Not with Danny's routine. Not without equipment showing signs of struggle. Rumor 2, they argued on the boat. Some locals recalled seeing Danny and Joel speaking tensely earlier that week. People wondered if the tension had followed them onto the water. Rumor 3, one man tried to leave the boat. This rumor grew from the missing life jacket. But again, there wasn't enough evidence to back it up. Rumor 4, the distress call wasn't from Danny. This theory spread quickly. People who knew Danny claimed he would have included coordinates. He would have spoken clearly. But static and fear can make anyone sound different. No one knew for sure. The second morning felt different. Quieter. More resigned. More serious. The rain outside your window right now almost matches the mood. Steady, unhurried, but constant. 6:12 a.m., joint operations begin. Coast Guard. Marine Patrol. Aerial search. 2 private vessels. And several drone teams. The ocean wasn't treated like a danger, but like a puzzle. And every passing hour without answers made the puzzle more frustrating. By mid-morning, investigators learned a few things. 1. The radio on Danny's boat had no mechanical failure. It worked perfectly when tested. This meant the incomplete distress call was not caused by equipment malfunction. Which raised the question. Why didn't either man call again? 2. Joel's phone had been turned off before 8 a.m. Not dead. Turned off. Deliberately. 3. Danny's jacket and thermos were untouched. If the boat had suddenly rocked or someone fell, things would have scattered. But the cabin looked like it was paused mid-morning. Neat. Organized. Unrushed. 4. The course of the boat didn't match a simple fishing path. The Rene Marie had drifted toward deeper water. Farther than Danny ever chose to fish, especially before noon. Something changed their plan. The town's reaction. People gathered on the shoreline as the search continued. Some stayed for hours. Some brought food to the rescuers. Some simply watched the horizon, hoping for movement. But beneath the concern, there was something else. Suspicion. And not random suspicion. Suspicion directed at the one person many believed was capable of making the day end badly. Joel. Even though there was no evidence. Even though nothing was confirmed. The town's collective memory of past arguments lingered like clouds. But suspicion alone couldn't solve anything. Not without evidence. Not without bodies. Not without answers the ocean refused to give. At the end of the second day, the Coast Guard made the announcement nobody wanted to hear. We are continuing active search operations, but survival probability is decreasing. And that's when the investigation shifted from rescue to understanding what happened. The first 48 hours ended not with clarity, but with more questions. The ocean search continued, but by the third day, investigators shifted their focus in 2 directions. The boat, and the past. Because when the water refuses to give you answers, you start looking at what people leave behind on land. And this is where the story becomes less about waves and weather. And more about choices, secrets, and the quiet details that don't add up. Investigators brought the Rene Marie onto land for a full inspection. From a distance, the boat still looked normal. But up close, they began to see things that didn't match the simple accident theory. 1. The radio reset button was pressed. This was subtle, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. The reset button wipes coordinates. It also cuts transmission power for a few seconds. Meaning the distress call might have been interrupted manually. Not by accident. 2. One coffee cup was half empty, the other was untouched. Danny made 2 cups that morning. Joel loved coffee. He drank it fast. But the half-empty cup wasn't his brand. It was Danny's. Which suggests Joel hadn't even started drinking his. Meaning whatever happened early. Before the trip truly began. 3. Danny's fishing knife was missing. He kept it in the same slot for years. Very particular about it. The slot was empty. The knife was never found. There were no signs it had been used violently, no damage, no marks, just missing. This small detail became one of the investigation's most confusing points. 4. No signs of mechanical problems. The engine worked. No leaks. No damage. Fuel was normal. The boat didn't fail the men. Something else did. Interviewing the town, what people remembered. Investigators spoke to everyone who had seen Danny and Joel that week. And small pieces of conversation began forming a pattern. Danny had been quietly worried. A marina worker said Danny had asked about renting a different storage unit for the boat, separate from Joel's. A close friend said Danny had recently changed the passcode on his shed. A waitress said Danny looked tired in a way that wasn't physical. Joel had been pressuring Danny about money. Multiple people reported hearing Joel talk about needing a big fresh start. Something involving a deal that had gone wrong. One man overheard Joel saying, "Danny owes me. He knows he does." No one knew what that meant. But everyone remembered it once the men disappeared. A hidden disagreement surfaces. On the evening before the fishing trip, a dock worker heard Danny say something unusual. "Tomorrow will settle everything." He wasn't angry. He wasn't loud. Just resigned. Calm in a way that sounded final. This sentence heavily shaped the investigation later. Because it hinted the fishing trip wasn't just a routine outing. It was a conversation. A confrontation. Maybe even a turning point. Timeline contradictions emerge. Investigators laid out the timeline. Danny left home at 4:45 a.m. Danny arrived at the dock around 5:12 a.m. Joel arrived roughly 20 minutes later. They left at 5:52 a.m. Distress call at 9:14 a.m. Radar ping around 10. Boat found around 11:48. No sightings in between. But something felt off. The 9:14 a.m. call didn't match the boat's location. The boat was much farther away from the position indicated by the voice transmission. Even allowing for drift, the math didn't fully work. Investigators started to wonder. Was the distress call even made where the boat ended up? Or had the boat moved intentionally? This was the first moment the investigation quietly shifted from an accident to something more complicated. The last person to see Joel that morning. A local gas station manager revealed something surprising. Joel stopped to buy a bottle of water before heading to the dock. Security footage showed this. The odd part? Joel looked anxious. Not tired. Not groggy. Anxious. He kept checking over his shoulder. He left without his change. He looked like a man who wasn't anticipating a simple, peaceful fishing trip. A private message found in Joel's phone history. Forensic techs found a deleted text in Joel's backup. Sent 2 days before the fishing trip. It read, "If you won't help me, I'll handle it my way." The message had no recipient name, just a number investigators couldn't trace. But the wording became central to the case. Not because it was incriminating, but because it showed mindset. Tension. Desperation. Pressure. Investigators begin dividing into two camps. Camp A, the accident theory. One man falls. The other jumps in to save him. Cold water shock. Boaters drown before they can climb back aboard. It's happened before. But the untouched cabin, missing knife, and strange distress call didn't align perfectly. Camp B, the perfect crime theory. Not in a dramatic sense. Not in a movie sense. But in the sense of one man planning something. And the ocean being used to erase the evidence. It wasn't a popular theory publicly. But internally, some investigators couldn't ignore the signs. The rain outside mirrors the mood. Steady. quiet. Persistent. Because this stage of the story is not about conclusions, but about the slow, careful peeling back of layers. The facts didn't point to one clear explanation, especially not yet. But they pointed to intentions, patterns, and a shared history between two men that wasn't as balanced as the town once believed. As we drift into this final part of the story, with the soft rainfall around you, it's worth stepping back and looking at everything we've pieced together, every timeline, every interview, every strange silence and every uneasy coincidence. The case of the so-called fishing trip murder lives in that unsettling space where facts exist, but conclusions don't always follow. And that uncertainty is exactly why people still talk about it, still pick it apart, still wonder what really happened out there on the open water. When investigators first tried to reconstruct the hours leading up to the disappearance, they kept running into small contradictions. Nothing dramatic. Just little slips. You know the kind, the "oh, I thought you said it happened earlier" type of inconsistencies. In most cases, those can be explained away easily. Stress, confusion, memory blur. But in a case like this, when those tiny gaps stack up, they start to feel heavier. More deliberate. And when they appear alongside unusual behavior, a late-night drive, a sudden change in routine, or a story that subtly shifts over time, investigators notice. Still, no matter how suspicious things appear from the outside, what we can't forget is that real lives sit at the center of this story. A family waiting for answers. A community left unsure. Friends trying to balance grief with the uncomfortable possibility that maybe, the truth isn't as straightforward as they once believed. And in the middle of it all, the ocean, patient, unmoved, keeping whatever secrets it chooses to keep. One of the most haunting aspects of this case is how the environment itself becomes part of the mystery. The sea is unpredictable. It can erase footprints, swallow evidence, distort timelines, and leave even the most experienced investigators guessing. When the official report finally described the disappearance as unresolved, it wasn't for lack of effort. It was the realization that nature doesn't always give back what it takes. But people are people, and speculation filled the gaps left behind. Some are convinced it was a tragic accident, an unforeseen wave, a slip, a misjudged moment. Others believe it was a meticulously planned escape or even a staged scenario. And then there are those who think it was something darker, something intentional. The perfect crime theory. That idea has a certain chill to it, doesn't it? The notion that someone could orchestrate a situation where the ocean covers their tracks so completely that no one will ever truly know. Yet, even theories like that rely on imagination more than evidence. And that's the part many forget. What we feel happened, what we suspect happened, isn't the same as what can be proven. And in real investigations, proof is everything. As the rain continues gently in the background, it's worth acknowledging something softer, a truth Eleanor always emphasized in her research and Bailey often highlighted in her storytelling: mysteries aren't just puzzles. They're human stories. And human stories rarely fit into perfect categories. People can be complicated, unpredictable, contradictory. Innocent actions can look suspicious, and guilty actions can be hidden behind normal routines. The world is rarely black and white, even when we wish it were. So as the case slowly settled into its unsolved status, what remained was a quiet acceptance. Not closure, not clarity, just acceptance. The kind that comes when people finally stop trying to force answers out of an uncooperative truth. The ocean returned to its usual rhythm. The boat was eventually sold. The news cycle moved on. Life resumed its shape around the empty space left behind. And yet, on calm nights like this, with soft rainfall and the kind of stillness that makes you notice your own breathing, it's hard not to think of the unanswered questions. The last conversations. The tiny inconsistencies. The boat drifting. The phone call that didn't come. The choice to go fishing that morning at all. All of it lingers like mist on the surface of the water. Some mysteries remain open not because no one cared, but because the truth chose not to surface. And maybe, that's where we leave this one. Not solved. Not forgotten. Just resting, gently, in the space between possibility and memory, carried softly by the quiet rhythm of the rain. As we ease into the final moments of this story, let the steady patter of rain guide your thoughts into a softer place. The mystery we just walked through may be tangled and unresolved, but you don't need to carry any of its weight with you now. Imagine setting it down gently, like placing a stone on a quiet shoreline and stepping back as the tide slowly pulls around it. Cases like this one, where the truth drifts just out of reach, can leave your mind looping over possibilities. But for tonight, you're allowed to let those questions fade. The investigators did what they could. The families held on to what they knew. And the ocean kept what it chose to keep. There's a strange comfort in that balance, the understanding that not everything demands an immediate answer, and not every mystery is yours to solve. Take a slow breath. Let it settle. Where facts end, peace can begin. Not because the story is complete, but because you've reached the quiet part, the part where the waves calm, the air cools, and the mind softens into rest. Picture the boat now. Not as evidence, not as a symbol of loss or suspicion, but simply as an empty vessel resting at the dock. The ropes still. The water dark and smooth beneath it. The night sky opening above like a gentle curtain. Whatever happened out there has already happened. The story is no longer in motion. It's paused, suspended, undisturbed. You're just an observer, watching from a safe distance as the rain falls softly around you. Let the uncertainty drift away. Let the open questions dissolve. Let the sea have its secrets, and let your mind have its quiet. You've reached the end of the journey for tonight. Nothing more to unravel. Nothing more to hold on to. Just the rhythm of the rain, steady and patient, guiding you into a deeper calm. The rain is falling tonight. Soft, steady, like a lullaby the world forgot to sing. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine it tapping on the roof, sliding down the windowpane, filling the air with quiet rhythm. That's where we begin, not with shouting or chaos, but with the calm before questions rise. In a small coastal town, where the horizon meets the endless ocean, life often moves slowly. People rise with the tides, and the smell of salt and damp earth is constant. It is a place where everyone knows each other, and every unusual absence is noticed almost immediately. One day, the town noticed something that would whisper through the streets for years to come. A mother, loving and familiar to those around her, was gone. And her son, the one who had left home only hours before for a simple trip at sea, would return, 8 days later. Alone. But here's the question that haunted the community. How could he survive for 8 days while she disappeared so suddenly? And more quietly, unspoken but lingering, was the deeper worry: did something happen before he left, something the ocean only helped conceal? Tonight, we're going to walk through the days surrounding her disappearance. Not quickly, not urgently, slowly, like a boat drifting on gentle waves, like listening to rain in a dark room. We'll explore the lives of mother and son, the town that watched them, and the sea that carried so many unanswered questions. Take a deep breath. Let the sound of rain steady your mind. Let your thoughts drift with it. And when you're ready, we'll begin, at the quiet edge of a morning that changed everything. Before we drift into the mystery of the sea and the disappearance, let's pause and get to know the people at the heart of this story. The mother. The son. Their lives. Their routines. The subtle details that make them human, that make this story more than just events on a timeline. Grace was the kind of woman whose presence was quiet but noticeable. Not loud. Not flashy. But steady. Dependable. Someone the town leaned on for small favors or advice. She loved tending her garden, especially roses and small potted herbs by the window. She baked bread and cookies almost every week, often leaving a loaf or two for neighbors she cared about. Her life was structured, rhythmic, predictable. She kept lists, remembered birthdays, and had a small circle of friends she trusted completely. Grace also had a gentle sense of humor. It appeared in quiet ways, a small chuckle at a funny story, a teasing comment when someone mispronounced a word. People in town remembered that warmth, even years later. But Grace was human. She had worries she kept private. Bills that weighed on her mind, health checkups she sometimes dreaded, and concerns about her son's choices that she didn't always voice. Michael, her only child, was very different from his mother. Where Grace was steady, he was restless. Where she followed routines, he sometimes broke them on a whim. Where she had deep-rooted connections, he sometimes sought independence, even if it meant distance. Michael grew up loving the sea. Fishing trips, small boats, and the quiet solitude of water were his true escapes. He was intelligent and resourceful but occasionally impulsive, a combination that sometimes led to small conflicts at home. People described him as charming when he wanted to be, yet sometimes difficult to read. The relationship between Michael and Grace was close, but complicated. A mixture of love, frustration, and subtle tension. She worried about him. He wanted to prove himself. Michael had recently argued with his mother about spending habits and responsibilities at home. Nothing extreme, but enough to leave an emotional residue. Grace had tried to guide him without forcing her opinion, which sometimes made him feel constrained. They shared moments of tenderness too, quiet dinners, shared laughs, and small gestures of care. These ordinary moments, the laughs, the sighs, the small arguments, would later gain new weight when the disappearance happened. In quiet reflection, investigators and townspeople began to piece together how the personality traits, decisions, and tensions between mother and son played into the events that followed. The townspeople often described them as typical, mother and son navigating life as best they could. Friendly. Known. Human. Their dynamic was visible to those paying attention but private enough that some details would only emerge after the disappearance. As the rain continues outside your window, imagine them in their home. Grace tending her plants. Michael preparing for a small trip at sea, unaware that the days ahead would test everything. Picture the calm routines, the human stories, the ordinary beginnings. And now, we'll move to the day before the trip, the final interactions that set the stage for the unfolding mystery. The rain falls gently outside, soft and rhythmic, as if marking time. It's the kind of weather that makes you pause, notice small details, and listen carefully to the world around you. And in this quiet, ordinary rhythm, the last day before Michael's fishing trip begins. Grace started her morning like she always did. A cup of tea by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. Feeding the small garden plants she tended with care. Checking her calendar, making mental notes of appointments and errands. Michael, meanwhile, was preparing for his trip. Checking the boat's fuel, life jackets, and nets. Organizing fishing gear carefully, double-checking supplies for an overnight excursion. Occasionally glancing at his mother, sharing small conversations about timing and plans. There was no tension visible in these quiet moments, only the subtle undertone of a relationship that carried both love and unspoken concerns. By mid-afternoon, small disagreements arose, the kind that feel almost invisible until later. Grace reminded Michael to double-check the boat's registration papers. Michael brushed off the concern lightly, promising he'd handle it. They exchanged a few words about responsibilities at home, about chores, and about preparations for the trip. Nothing dramatic. Nothing loud. Just the quiet friction that exists in all close relationships. It's easy to overlook such moments. Yet in hindsight, investigators would later note these conversations, because even small arguments sometimes hold weight in a story like this. As evening approached, Grace and Michael shared softer moments. A quiet dinner together, casual conversation, laughter at small jokes. Grace reminding Michael to dress warmly for the early morning chill. Michael offering to help her with some small household task, a gesture of care despite the tension. The day ends with a sense of calm normalcy. The kind of day that feels ordinary until the world changes. Despite the ordinary flow, there were hints of unease. Grace noticed Michael seemed distracted at times. Michael checked the weather forecast more than usual, paused by the window several times, and appeared reflective. These subtle signs wouldn't alarm anyone in the moment but gain significance later as pieces of the unfolding story. As the night settles in, with rain falling softly and the house quieting down, the scene is set. Mother and son, intertwined lives, ordinary routines. Subtle tensions, gentle care, small hints of worry. A world that appears calm, even as the tide of events quietly begins to shift. The next morning will bring the trip, the sea, and the moments that will ripple through the lives of everyone who knew them. The rain continues gently outside, a rhythmic companion to our story. Imagine it falling on the rooftops, on the docks, on the small boat waiting by the harbor. The morning begins quietly, almost ordinary, but it carries a subtle tension, the kind you only notice in retrospect. Michael woke before sunrise. The soft gray light through the windows hinted at the approaching day. He brewed coffee, packed sandwiches, and checked the boat supplies. Life jackets. Fishing nets. Tools. Navigation equipment. Each action was careful, precise, almost ritualistic. Grace was still asleep, resting before the day's chill fully arrived. She would later recall remembering him leaving quietly, no loud goodbyes, just a small wave and a gentle, "I'll be back soon." The rain tapping against the window seemed to follow him as he stepped outside, a soft soundtrack to the start of a day that would become unforgettable. By 5:45 a.m., Michael arrived at the dock. The harbor was quiet. A few early birds were already preparing their own boats. Mist hovered above the water, blending the horizon into a soft gray haze. Michael checked the engine and the fuel one last time. Everything was in order. It was calm, deceptively calm. There were no warning signs, no dramatic weather. Just the gentle rocking of the boat and the whisper of water against the hull. Michael meticulously loaded the boat. Fishing rods placed carefully in holders. Cooler stocked with supplies. Life jackets laid out neatly. He paused briefly to sip his coffee, looking out over the water. A reflective, almost meditative moment. There were small things others would later notice. A half-empty thermos left on the dock. Gloves arranged neatly on the seat. A subtle hesitation as he glanced back toward the parking area. It was barely noticeable, but like tiny ripples on water, these small details would gain meaning later. At approximately 6:05 a.m., Michael untied the boat. The engine hummed softly. Water lapped gently against the sides. Mist clung to the surface, making the edges of the harbor almost ethereal. No one else was on the water yet. No wind to disturb the calm. No storms threatening the day. And so the boat began to drift toward open water, carrying a man who was about to survive 8 days at sea, and a mystery that would grow steadily around him. The harbor slowly fades behind him. The morning rain continues, soft and constant. Everything is quiet. Everything seems ordinary. But the day ahead, the hours on the open water, will become a story of endurance, reflection, and unanswered questions. And as the boat drifts further from shore, the calm of the morning hides the uncertainty waiting just beyond the horizon. The morning unfolds quietly, the soft patter of rain against the windows still present. Michael's boat drifts steadily on the calm waters, unaware that these hours will soon ripple into one of the most puzzling chapters of this story. By mid-morning, the town begins to notice something unusual. Michael has been out longer than expected. Friends and neighbors start to call, gently, checking in. The harbor staff notice the boat still hasn't returned. The mist remains thick, softening the view of the distant shoreline. At this point, no one senses panic, only a gentle concern that lingers like the rain in the air. Around 10 a.m., Grace calls the local marina. She asks if anyone has seen Michael's boat. Staff check the logs. The engine was working, and no radio distress was reported. The mist over the harbor adds an air of uncertainty, making visibility poor, and adding to the tension of waiting. The town watches the water, the subtle movements of the waves carrying an uneasy silence. By late morning, the first search is quietly organized. Local fishermen set out to scan nearby channels. Coast Guard boats patrol slowly, methodically. Helicopters fly overhead, moving in gentle arcs, their blades slicing the quiet air. The search is thorough but calm. No urgency, no chaos, just steady, meticulous observation, the type that Eleanor favored in her research. As the hours pass, small details begin to appear. A fishing net floats untangled near the boat's usual path. A glove drifts in the water, likely fallen earlier. The boat seems to drift slightly off its expected route, guided by gentle currents. None of these signs point conclusively to what happened. But like small ripples spreading on a pond, they begin to form a pattern. Friends gather at the harbor, quietly watching the horizon. The mist has begun to lift slightly, revealing the expanse of open water. Whispers circulate, theories about storms, small accidents, and unexpected obstacles. The rain continues softly, matching the town's quiet unease. No one wants to imagine a tragedy, but instinctive concern starts to grow. The search teams report minimal results, no sign of Michael yet. The town lights flicker in the mist, creating soft reflections on the water. Grace sits by her window, listening to the rain, hoping for any news. It's during this quiet, patient observation that the first unsettling thought begins to take shape: Michael's extended absence is no longer simple. Something has shifted, just enough to make the town, the family, and the investigators wonder about the unfolding mystery. The boat drifts further from the shore, the rain keeps falling, and the hours stretch on. This is the calm before the full realization of what these 8 days at sea will mean: survival, endurance, and the quiet questions that will linger long after the storm passes. The rain continues softly against your window, blending with the imagined gentle splash of waves. Michael is now alone on the open water, the shoreline distant and fading. The next 8 days will test him in ways both physical and mental, but we'll explore this slowly, calmly, focusing on endurance, reflection, and human behavior. After leaving the harbor, Michael navigates slowly, checking the engine and the nets. Mist hangs lightly over the water, softening the horizon. Initial calm begins to give way to the realization of being completely alone. These first hours are about routine and careful observation. Drinking water in measured sips. Securing the fishing equipment. Maintaining the engine and checking fuel. The sea offers no challenge yet, but a subtle awareness grows: he is responsible for everything around him. Every small decision matters. The novelty of solitude shifts into mindfulness. Thoughts drift to home, to his mother, and to the life he left behind. He observes patterns in the waves, the wind, and the birds around him. Small actions become vital. Organizing supplies to make them last. Conserving energy. Mentally preparing for the unknown. Here, psychological resilience starts to show: how humans adapt to being alone, how the mind finds rhythm even in uncertainty. Isolation deepens. Michael keeps a mental log, marking each day in his head. Rain and sea continue as a soft backdrop, gentle but constant. Thoughts move between memories, regrets, and planning. He develops routines to stay sane: checking equipment, rationing food, and writing mental notes. He remembers conversations with his mother, reflecting on their life together. Quiet self-talk becomes a survival tool. As the final days approach, Michael's body shows signs of fatigue, but his mind remains alert. He notices small signs of land or changes in weather patterns, holding hope. Decision-making becomes sharper, guided by necessity and experience. Despite challenges, He keeps perspective, observing the calm and chaos of nature alike. He reflects on past choices. What led him here, and what might follow. This section illustrates the interplay of human resilience and mental endurance, showing how survival is as much about the mind as it is about the body. Returning thoughts. By the 8th day, Michael sights land, guiding the boat carefully towards safety. Rain has lightened, clouds breaking to reveal a soft, pale sunlight. The world feels renewed, quiet, and gentle after the prolonged solitude. This is a moment of calm triumph. Survival achieved, but questions still lingering. The sea has tested him, stretched him, and left him changed. The rain and waves, constant companions, fade gently in memory. He is safe, but the story is far from complete. The mystery surrounding his mother's disappearance begins to surface once more, waiting for the investigators to piece together what really happened before he set out to sea. The rain falls softly outside, almost echoing the quiet tension in the town. After 8 days at sea, Michael finally returns. Alone. Safe, yes, but the mystery that began with his mother's disappearance is far from over. The boat slides gently into the dock, water lapping quietly against the hull. Townspeople watch from a distance, the mist softening their figures. Michael steps onto the pier, exhausted but composed, carrying the quiet confidence of someone who has endured the open sea. There's relief, certainly. But also curiosity, concern, and a subtle unease that hangs in the air like the lingering drizzle. Initial questions. Investigators begin gently, methodically. Where exactly was he each day? How did he manage to survive alone? Why was his mother missing during this time? Small inconsistencies appear. Timelines don't perfectly align. Memories of what he did on certain days vary slightly under repeated questioning. Some items aboard the boat seem displaced or missing. These are not dramatic red flags, just small details, subtle enough to raise quiet curiosity but important for understanding the story fully. Friends and neighbors offer congratulations, relief, and tentative smiles. Whispers begin to circulate, soft and cautious, about what could have happened before he left. People begin to recall minor disagreements or tensions that now feel more significant in hindsight. The rain continues, steady and gentle, mirroring the town's quiet tension. Not chaotic, not loud, but persistent. Investigation deepens. Detectives begin carefully examining the timeline of events before and during the trip. Michael's interactions with his mother in the days prior. Physical evidence from the boat, items moved or missing, logs, and personal belongings. Investigators divide their attention. 1. The survival story, analyzing how he endured 8 days at sea, mapping his route, rationing, and strategies. 2. The disappearance mystery. Reconstructing what happened to his mother, searching for evidence, and revisiting past conversations or disputes. The quiet, meticulous work is less dramatic than a stormy chase but infinitely more revealing. Subtle patterns begin to emerge, not yet conclusions, but pieces of a puzzle forming slowly. Small contradictions in recollections appear. The missing or displaced items aboard the boat draw quiet attention. Psychological insights emerge. The mind under stress, human resilience, and the way isolation changes behavior. Even as Michael sits quietly, the rain falling around him, investigators begin to wonder, did survival at sea reveal character, or obscure truth? Did the past actions lead to this moment, and if so, how? Michael's return marks a transition, the immediate danger has passed, but the mystery lingers. The rain continues, soft and unending, echoing the persistence of unanswered questions. The town is calm on the surface, but beneath that calm lies curiosity, suspicion, and the quiet search for answers that may never fully arrive. The rain falls steadily outside, soft and constant, like the passage of time itself. Michael is back on shore, safe, yet the story is far from complete. Investigators quietly dig into the events leading up to his mother's disappearance, looking for patterns, inconsistencies, and clues, all while the town watches silently, curious and concerned. Early clues and observations. Investigators begin by examining the small details. Items missing or slightly displaced aboard the boat. A journal left open, pages turned to mundane notes, yet timing discrepancies noted. Text messages, call logs, and subtle communications in the days before the trip. Each clue is small on its own, but together they begin to suggest a story more complex than anyone imagined. Detectives quietly divide the investigation into two threads. 1. Accident or misadventure. Could the mother have been taken by chance? Could a sudden illness or misstep explain her absence? Was Michael's 8-day isolation purely survival? 2. Intentional disappearance. Were there underlying tensions that suggest deliberate actions? Could evidence have been moved or altered to mislead? Psychological patterns, minor inconsistencies, and timing irregularities are examined gently, not accusingly. The investigation is meticulous, careful, every detail considered without rushing. Town memories and quiet observations. Investigators speak softly with neighbors, friends, and extended family. Some recall small disagreements between Michael and his mother. Others note subtle changes in behavior, a distracted glance, an unusual remark, an uncharacteristic action. Even small gestures, like the arrangement of belongings or the timing of a phone call, take on meaning under careful scrutiny. These recollections are handled with care, not sensationalized, but observed for patterns. Psychological insights. Investigators and experts consider how stress, isolation, and fear affect memory and behavior. Michael's 8 days at sea become a lens to study endurance, decision-making, and subtle human instincts. The town reflects on how ordinary people, in ordinary moments, sometimes make choices that appear mysterious only in retrospect. Rain continues gently, echoing the slow, methodical pace of observation. By now, two main hypotheses quietly emerge. 1. Tragic circumstance. A series of unfortunate events combine to create the disappearance. No intent, just timing, chance, and miscommunication. 2. Deliberate actions. Small, subtle indicators hint at possible premeditation. Missing items, minor contradictions, and behavior patterns form a puzzle piece by piece. No conclusions are drawn, only gentle, quiet questions. The investigation deepens without urgency, without drama. The rain continues, soft and rhythmic. The boat is docked. Michael is on land. The town watches. And still, questions linger. Not screaming, not urgent. Just quietly, persistently, like the rain falling outside. The story moves slowly now toward reflection, as we prepare to explore the final, peaceful wind down, where facts settle gently and the mind is invited to rest. The rain continues its gentle rhythm, soft against rooftops and windows, as if marking the passage of hours. We have followed Michael's journey, his mother's disappearance, the 8 days at sea, and the slow, meticulous investigation that followed. Now, it is time to pause and reflect. Not everything is clear, and not every question has an answer. Some pieces of the puzzle fit neatly, others remain unresolved, slipping quietly between the lines of observation. The town, the investigators, and even Michael himself carry fragments of uncertainty, small reminders that life rarely offers perfect clarity. It is in these quiet moments that the human side of the story comes into focus. The mother, remembered for her warmth and care. The son, remarkable for endurance, resilience, and subtle complexity. The family, friends, and neighbors, all quietly observing, wondering, and reflecting. Some mysteries remain unsolved not for lack of effort, but because the truth is complicated and multifaceted. Patterns exist, but they do not always reveal intent or outcome. The mind naturally seeks answers, yet sometimes the most peaceful conclusion is accepting that some questions may linger indefinitely. Human behavior and understanding. We have seen how stress, isolation, and circumstance shape decisions. We have observed subtle tensions in everyday interactions, small disagreements, fleeting distractions, and unspoken concerns. These gentle insights remind us that human lives are nuanced, unpredictable, and, often, quietly mysterious. As the rain continues, imagine the town settling into the night. Lights dim behind windows. The boat rests at the dock, still and undisturbed. The water laps quietly against its hull. The story does not demand a conclusion tonight. Instead, it asks only that you reflect, gently, on endurance, human nature, and the quiet mysteries that drift through life like soft ripples on calm water. Some stories do not end with resolution. Some remain suspended, like mist over the ocean or rain on a quiet town. And sometimes, that is enough, to let the mystery rest, to let the mind rest, and to allow the rain to carry both softly into the night. The rain continues softly outside, steady and gentle, as if lulling the world into a slow, calm rhythm. The story of Michael and his mother has carried us through mystery, endurance, and reflection. Now, it is time to let it settle quietly, like a gentle tide returning to the shore. Picture the harbor now, boats at rest, water smooth and reflective. The town's lights glow faintly through the mist. The boat that carried Michael drifts gently at the dock, the past events resting in silence. No answers are demanded tonight. No conclusions pressed. Just the quiet, unhurried rhythm of the rain and the calm of a story softly concluded. Take a slow, deep breath. Let it fill your chest, and release it gently. The mystery is a quiet companion now, no longer pressing, no longer urgent. The people in this story, with their hopes, fears, and endurance, are at rest for tonight. Your mind, too, can rest, letting the soft sound of rain carry away tension and curiosity alike. Imagine the rain washing over the town, over the harbor, over the waves that carried Michael. Each drop a gentle reminder of calm. Each ripple a quiet echo of the story you just followed. Let your thoughts drift, unburdened, into stillness. The world outside is serene, and so can your mind. Some stories are not meant to be fully solved. Some mysteries remain suspended, like mist over the ocean or quiet raindrops on a rooftop. Tonight, you can let it rest. Let the rain carry the story, and let yourself drift into calm, soft sleep. Good night.